Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, in our Spotlight segment, we focus on the United Nations Population Fund with its Sri Lanka representative Alain Sibenaler in the hot seat. Then, Hasta Premratna, LMD columnist and market analyst, gives us his views on market sentiment. And TNS Lanka's country manager Kiran Echen wraps up the show with his analysis of the island-wide survey on cricket and the nation. That's the lineup for Benchmark.
Welcome to another edition of Benchmark. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. Today we are focusing on the United Nations Population Fund, or you know it better as the UNFPA, whose work in Sri Lanka includes addressing the reproductive health needs of young people, protecting women's rights and gender-based violence. To elaborate on the UNFPA's role here in Sri Lanka, we invited their representative in this country, Alain Sibenaler. Good to have you on the show and welcome to our studios.
Thank you
Alain.
for having me.
Just as a brief, can we just find out what are your initial thoughts on Sri Lanka's youth population?
It's not very different from most countries that are in this stage of middle income country. It is a young population, almost, let's say 40% is under the age of 25. The proportion that are between what we call the adolescent age, between 15 and 24, is around 15%. That is not very high compared to other developing nations, which shows that it is in its demographic transition. I find it extremely entrepreneurial, full of energy and quite committed.
Lovely. That's a nice way to start off the program. So what is UNFPA's primary role in Sri Lanka, and are you satisfied the way things have gone?
I'm very satisfied because one of the Sri Lanka's greatest social indicators is the one on what we call maternal mortality. So that is the ratio of women who die because they want to give birth to a child. So they die either in childbirth or during their pregnancy, and that is extremely low. There's 38, some even say in the higher 20s, women that die per 100,000 live births. Now, that is an indication of a good social system, and that is also an indication of a very good health system. But I do think it's also an indication of UNFPA's successful work in Sri Lanka over many decades, that we've really captured the issues around maternal health quite nicely. Since we are at that good level of success, we would really now like to focus on young people's potential, and it's difficult on how do we capture that potential, how do we promote it. So we're working on that, but I would also want to mention that the second big aspect is on women and young women.
And what would your work with women and young women entail?
With women, we are still having a very strong health component. For example, we just launched medical guidelines for medical officers on how they make tests, forensic tests for victims that have been sexually abused, right? So we really keep that health focus still, but linking it more to women's rights. What happens to a victim or a person who's been subject to any form of violence or discrimination. We will continue also on the quality of reproductive care, of reproductive health. I'm talking, for example, about good qualifications of the midwives or of registered nurses or of specialist gynecologists. But linking it now to youth, focusing on young people, I think teenage pregnancy is something that we should pay more attention to in this country, although the percentage is low, but that is typically something that UNFPA is doing. And related to that is young women's rights, including, and most and foremost, their reproductive rights. Are they respected? Are they aware of them? How is it addressed in school, out of school, and how can they act as responsible, empowered young women deciding themselves on their reproductive future?
You know, despite the fact that we do have a large number of educated young workers, Sri Lanka's labour market is characterized by very high youth unemployment, high underemployment, which is considerable. What steps need to be taken to address these issues, the issues of youth unemployment in the country, despite the fact that we seem to have a literate and educated young genre of people?
This is exactly one of the challenges that we're trying to draw the policymakers' attention to. That percentage that you've mentioned is 17. Its youth unemployment is around 17%. Now, I always say in my speeches that, or in my statements, that that is still very low compared to some of the European economies right now, like Greece, Spain, Portugal, Italy. However, it is, as you say, it is not low enough. Now, what needs to be done, I think, is a number of things. The first is what we call smoothen the transition from the education to the job market, paying more attention to vocational training, very skilled training, so that you have the possibilities to either go into a technical, administrative, managerial position, but making that environment much more enabling, I think. I want to pay special emphasis, put special emphasis on computer literacy and English literacy. Making the young people a bit more communication savvy, and that does not mean posting on Facebook or mastering selfies on your cell phone, but that is really being connected to technologies that make you very competitive. We have found some of the young Sri Lankans that are extremely successful because they manage that. They have that ability to make full use of information communication technologies. That is the second one. The third one is to pay attention to a gender disparity. It is very strange that you have actually more women enrolled in university than you have boys. Yet the participation of young people in the labor market, in the labor force, is 35%, which tends to be explained by maybe some cultural factors, maybe some social factors that women choose to not pursue a career. And when I say that, I don't want to point the finger at the women's choice, but there may not be enabling environment enough so that you know how you can have your care for your children taken and so forth, so that you actually become a successful entrepreneur and a businesswoman. And so I think these are some of the pointers, but as the UN or UNFPA typically does, there's one thing that we don't do, and that is give orientations or give advice. I think we really enable that discussion.
Right, so time for a commercial break now, and on the other side, Alain Sibenaler talks about how the business community can contribute towards empowering the youth of this country, and also looks at gender disparities in the regional workforce. Stay with us.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
As soon as my salary goes into my H&B account, my family goes shopping just like a power play. Now with H&B mobile banking, wherever you are in the world, you can check your account balance and do your banking with ease. Wherever I am in the world, H&B is active on my mobile and tap 24 hours a day. H&B mobile banking. Bank anywhere from any mobile.
Welcome back. You're with Benchmark, and we're talking with Alain Sibenaler, the representative to Sri Lanka of the United Nations Population Fund. Alain, just getting back to some of the stuff that we were discussing, if we look at Sri Lanka and the rest of the developing world, what are the chief challenges faced in relation to the youth in these countries?
Sri Lanka is different from. I would really. I have a tendency to put it out of the basket of developing nations. I think Sri Lanka is really becoming more and more a strong example of a middle-income country. Now, the challenges regarding youth in developing nations is teenage pregnancies, is a fairly high degree of lack of an understanding of reproductive health and reproductive rights of women, of young girls. And then it's the lack of opportunities, which results in large unemployment. When you say large unemployment, it often transforms into social unrest, civic unrest, because of the lack of a future. And having served in an African country over the last 5 years, that's exactly what I witnessed on a day-to-day basis, where you have a large cohort of young people basically sitting in the street not knowing what to do. And I think that is a very serious issue, which is why in UNFPA we pay very, very close attention to the demographic transitions that countries are facing. Sri Lanka is not an exception. Every country is going through that, and we make the case that Sri Lanka has invested wisely in its young people over many decades, including investing in its health, in its education, and paying attention to the status of women and the special needs and issues of young women. And it shows in the indicators. So whereas in other developing countries, that degree of awareness of demographic dimensions is not at the same level. And hence you see it in the indicators as well. So that's how I compare Sri Lanka.
If you look at the business community in Sri Lanka, what can they do to empower our youth?
Let them come to them, listen to them, be very flexible and open. And what we say and what I say as a manager is to get out of their way, which means that create that space for dialogue, that space for ideas. And you've seen it in, I think, some of the most successful companies currently, globally. It starts with a business mentality that opens up and sort of speaks the language, let them express themselves in a way that is meaningful to them, in the language that they want to speak. But there is one thing that is critical for me, and that is to pay attention to harassment or any forms of discrimination against female young, the female young population. I make that point because we do not have statistics, but there are indications that that is an issue in this country, that a young woman faces harassment or any kind of infringement of their human rights, including at the workplace. And I think that's very, very important that the business community, or whether it's the policymakers, pay very, very strict attention to that.
From a Sri Lankan and a South Asian perspective, do you see gender disparities in the opportunities that are afforded to our young people?
I wouldn't say in the opportunities, at least not on paper, but I think it's in the practice. And the practice is complex. It has to do, earlier on I mentioned the cultural or social environment that especially South Asian countries are. Not unlinked to that is my previous intervention, which is on violence, on women's rights. So I think in the practice, yes, there is definitely a disparity that points against women's participation in the workforce, but at least we have seen also statistically that there are only 35% of Sri Lankan women that are actively involved in or actively participating in the workforce, and that doesn't look too good, and I think that needs to be redressed.
To conclude, Alain, what would be your vision for the development of women and young people in Sri Lanka?
It's relatively simple. It's to allow them to express themselves according to their potential. That starts with capturing their passion and their motivation. They may not, of course, all have the same, but I sense a fair amount of very intrinsic, very genuine motivation and passion around certain issues. Whatever they are, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in services, banking, whatever. It is important for the manager, the business manager, the public servant, the politician or the decision maker to capture those first and foremost. Then link it to the social environment, the cultural environment in respect of that, but that the social cultural environment is a leverage, is an enabling factor. And combining those would, I think, really be able, would lead to capturing that full potential of Sri Lankan's youth. Because as I said earlier on, and I want to conclude on that, I sincerely mean that it is imaginative, it is motivated, it is vibrant, and it's extremely smart. And a country that has those ingredients, because you link that to the political will, enabling environment, good social indicators, a good health infrastructure, good educational system, I think the country can go very fast and very far.
Thank you, Alain,
You're
for
most welcome,
sharing
Savitri.
your opinions and your views and thoughts with us.
Very pleased to be here.
So we've been talking to Alain Sibenaler, who in fact heads the country office of the UNFPA here in Sri Lanka. On the other side, we have the latest on the LMD TNS survey and also the latest on the Colombo boss.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC. Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
As soon as my salary goes into my HNB account, my family goes shopping just like a power play. Now with HNB mobile banking, wherever you are in the world, you can check your account balance and do your banking with ease. Wherever I am in the world, HNB is active on my mobile and tab 24 hours a day. HNB mobile banking. Bank anywhere from any mobile.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. We take a closer look at the bourse now, and with me is market analyst and LMD columnist Hasta Premaratna. So Hasta, could you just walk us through the performances of the bourse at this point of time?
Yeah. So if you look at the last month, especially in the month of June, we've seen very clearly the market picking up the momentum, and for the whole of this year there have been a little bit of a pickup time to time, but we haven't really seen a positive run, a so-called a kind of a bull run. But in June we saw a mini bull run because the index did pick up quite sizably, and year to date now market is up almost 10%. So if you look at the full year, we've seen from about month of January onwards the interest rates being gradually reduced, and in fact now being reduced to fairly significant levels. So with that reduction in interest rates, naturally people do get a very small component of interest incomes, which means that they're looking for alternative investments, and stock market naturally becomes one of them, and that's probably the easiest place to switch your money from a fixed deposit to invest. So that's exactly what has happened, where investors are now quietly looking at the market and looking at opportunities to see whether there is advantage to take in the context of the low interest rate scenario. So it's a 10% plus pickup during the year. Will definitely give a positive momentum to the overall sentiment, which has happened already. Plus the foreign investors who have been buying during the bad times have been sort of less active in the recent times. Of course, the retailers have participated more during the last few rallies in the market. But broadly, still there is value in the market if you look at it, look at the full fundamental valuations. And also, I think it's important to understand that not the entire market has gone up during the last month. It has been centered around selected stocks, both blue chips as well as smaller counters, which are fundamentally undervalued, which did warrant them to actually see a pickup. So it's a steady move. It has not been a sudden move. It has been a steady move, and there have been minor corrections. I would say that there will be some spikes in the market, and then there will be corrections in the coming months as well.
In most instances, it seems that foreign trading in a premier blue chip, John Keel's Holdings, is what props up the bourse. Now, why is this the case?
Yeah, so for the foreigners, I think John Keel's is a stock that they cannot sort of resist when they look at Sri Lanka as a whole, for a few reasons. One is that the John Keel's is a diversified conglomerate. It has exposure into key sectors like transport, tourism, and also covering into the food and beverages sector. So some key sectors that will definitely fuel the growth of the Sri Lankan economy. So sometimes one could view it as an investment towards the economy, because it covers a wider spectrum of the economy and some growth sectors as well. So in that context, people would like to take a stake in a conglomerate of that nature, because it's difficult for them to go and buy individual hotels, individual transport companies, individual maybe food and beverages companies, because some of those companies under John Keel's umbrella also listed companies on their own, but they don't have that liquidity that the main holding company has. And for foreign investors, the liquidity levels is a very important parameter when they look at investments. One is the size, other one is the liquidity. So size-wise, John Keel's has the largest market cap in Sri Lanka by far, and also it has fairly a substantial amount of free float that is trading in the market. Approximately 65 to 70% of the shares of the company are actually freely traded among investors who are not holding for long-term strategic reasons like ownership or whatever. So as a result, there is a diverse shareholding list, and there is a multiple number of foreign investors who take positions time to time, not just for trading purposes, but more for medium long-term purposes, but not just to hold forever. So as a result, you will see that there is a reasonable amount of liquidity, reasonable amount of size, and also fundamentally it focuses on to some of the important growth sectors, and that diversified portfolio offer a foreign investor a good platform to take a position into the Sri Lankan economy. So these factors combined, when you look at, attracts foreigners to John Keel's before maybe they look at some of the other companies, despite maybe John Keel's trading at 18, 20, 23 times price earnings ratios, which one can argue that it's a bit too expensive. But naturally, when you look at Sri Lanka, from a foreigner's perspective, I think John Keel's is a company that they probably would look at positively before they look at many other companies.
How are investors reacting to the communal violence witnessed in recent times now? Is it in any way affecting their investment patterns?
I mean, statistically speaking, it has not had an impact, because if you look at the month of June, where these issues came up in Alutgama and some of the other violence in the country, but the market has actually picked up, and we've seen a mini bull run as well. So statistically speaking, it has not had a direct impact that you can see as an immediate response in the market. But then having said that, I think it is important to understand whether this is more short-term one-off thing that will come in and then it will be kind of taken out of the picture completely, or whether there will be some level of continuity in these violence. I think the investors will watch closely. They'll look at whether there is longer term repercussions that can come. Like for example, if you look at the 1983 violence, it did have a 30-year impact into the country and became the worst enemy of the Sri Lankan economy. So hopefully the authorities, the politicians, the general public and whoever who's involved in this would look back to 1983 and say, hey, 30 years we had problems because of that one or two issues and few days of mistakes that we made, and probably authorities not taking adequate action to control at that time. So I assume that people will learn from their mistakes, and in this situation will act very differently and take more control and eliminate communal violence, which is absolute no-no when it comes to economic and investor mindset, because that's something that can really have a negative impact on the country if it is let go to continue. And one thing that the government and the authorities need to take complete control and eliminate, not only just eliminate, but also communicate to the wider investor community, the foreign community, the foreign media, in a manner in which that we have zero tolerance for these kind of things.
That was market analyst and LMD columnist Hasta Premratna. Going in for a short commercial break, after which we will take a closer look at the latest in the LMD TNS survey. Stay tuned.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
As soon as my salary goes into my H&B account, my family goes shopping just like a power play. Now with H&B mobile banking, wherever you are in the world, you can check your account balance and do your banking with ease. Wherever I am in the world, H&B is active on my mobile and tab 24 hours a day. H&B mobile banking. Bank anywhere from any mobile.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. We now take a closer look at the latest LNB TNS survey with the country manager of TNS Lanka, Kiran Echen. So, Kiran, how do people view cricket in Sri Lanka?
Well, you don't need a survey for that, do you, Anushan? I mean, we know in the subcontinent, cricket is much more than a game. It's a religion, and everyone loves it, everyone watches it. So some may hate it, but you can't just ignore it. But having said that, there's one theme about the survey that I would definitely like to point out, a very heartening fact, where almost everyone we talk to mention about how this game brings us together as a nation. They all talk about how this game instills a sense of fervor, a passion, a sense of national pride that very few things are able to do so easily. So I guess it's a fantastic binder.
What do respondents have to say about critical media coverage of the national team?
Majority of the respondents we spoke to, Anushan, over 60% of them actually feel the media should desist from unnecessary criticism. And many of them feel that much of the criticism our cricketers go through are unnecessary. And they also feel, hey, these are people who bring us a lot of national pride, so handle them with care. Such criticism might actually, psychologically bring them down or demotivate them. So that's a majority of them, but there's still the remaining 40% who are not sure and who feel sometimes a fair amount of criticism is necessary to point to them that, hey, these are areas that you should improve or behave appropriately, and sometimes a fraternity from outside has to do it, like the media, and hey, these are public figures, so they need to know how to handle such criticism.
Are they in favor of how our favorite sport is being run now in terms of quality of administration?
People don't have an idea, Anusha. So, we asked this question in the survey, and a third of them feel, I think the administration is fair and the national squad is being treated fairly. A third of them feel otherwise, another third of them unsure. So, this is what I call a classic split verdict, where people either don't know or opinion is divided. But having said that, there's one thing which almost everyone unanimously agree, which is the need for visionary administration. They talk about how if we have to continue this winning streak, if we have to continue with a strong team like this and continue building to even greater heights, there is a very immediate and strong need for visionary thinking and administration at all levels.
That was the country manager of TNS Lanka, Kiran HN. Thank you for watching Benchmark, and we hope to see you again next time.